In the modern day, it is a well-known fact that Japan and Korea often experience tense diplomatic tensions. Despite both being important U.S. allies and security partners, these tensions flow back and forth depending on timing and what politicians on both sides say, act, and how they interpret their complicated history. The tensions have deep historical roots, but they reached a decisive turning point with Japan's annexation of Korea in 1910. Many factors contributed to distrust and, in some cases, straight disdain for one another. Among the issues experienced by Koreans during the Japanese colonial period, among the most controversial is that of comfort women. Women who were subjected to a system that many historians and human rights organizations have described as a form of sexual slavery or sexual enslavement, some of whom are still alive today, are remembered, honored, and strongly advocated for by survivors' organizations and much of Korean civil society. The Japanese government has issued repeated apologies and expressions of remorse for the suffering of former comfort women, but the issue is often raised as rhetoric or historical revisionism by Japan becomes a major issue. So, what is the actual history and reasoning behind the tensions regarding the comfort women issue? Today, let's answer the question of, why is Japan's apology to comfort women still controversial? Korea under Japanese colonial occupation was, without a doubt, one of the darkest periods in Korean history. An effort to outright absorb Korea into the Japanese Empire through oppression still serves as a major point of contention in contemporary East Asian politics today. Among the myriad of issues that occurred during that time, there is perhaps none that is more present and discussed than that of Korean comfort women. The system existed before World War II, but expanded dramatically after the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. The comfort women system took women from many different places, including Korea, China, Taiwan, and many Southeast Asian nations, and recruited them into a system of military-controlled or military-associated comfort stations that could be interpreted as sexual slavery for the troops during the Sino-Japanese War. Comfort stations were established in response to requests from Japanese military authorities, while recruitment was often carried out by private recruiters and operators. Recruitment occurred under a variety of circumstances, including deception, coercion, economic and family pressures, and trafficking, while the precise circumstances varied between individuals and locations. There were also documented cases of direct involvement by administrative or military personnel. At the time, Korea was a Japanese colony, meaning Korean women were recruited within a colonial administrative system. After their official placement, women were subjected to many restrictions and requirements, including stripping freedom of movement, medical examinations, and, in some locations, contraception and other medical controls, military supervision, and monitored operating hours. Many women were subjected to coercive sexual exploitation and conditions that historians have characterized as sexual slavery. The system collapsed with Japan's defeat in 1945, although many survivors faced abandonment, displacement, and enormous difficulties returning to their homes. The horrors that these women faced were not forgotten, but in the chaotic post-war period of both Japan and Korea, focus was placed heavily on the persecution of Japanese war criminals during the Tokyo tribunals and the reconstruction of both nations. The tribunal persecuted Japanese leaders for a large range of war crimes, and its judgment included evidence concerning sexual violence and forced prostitution, and was placed in the forefront during the Guilin China judgments, stating Japan recruited women for supposed factory work, but actually forced them into prostitution with Japanese troops. The Allies were aware of Japanese sexual violence, and evidence concerning forced prostitution was introduced during the Tokyo Tribunal. However, the wider comfort women system was never made a central focus of the prosecution or the final judgment. The chaotic post-war period, as well as the Korean War, put all of these issues far further behind more pressing ones. Following the split of the Korean peninsula, massive rebuilding efforts and international diplomacy finally allowed South Korea and Japan to establish diplomatic ties through the 1965 Treaty of Basic Relations. These official diplomatic ties ensured economic aid and loans from Japan, and Japan subsequently maintained that the 1965 agreement had settled claims between the two countries, while the question of individual victims' claims remained contested. It wasn't until the 1980s, nearly 40 years after the end of the war, that the issue resurfaced again. In 1983, Seiji Yoshida published a memoir claiming that he had participated in forcibly taking women from rural Korea. His specific account was later discredited, and the Asahi Shimbun eventually retracted its reporting based on his testimony, and it became a major sticking point to right-wing Japanese politicians as proof it never happened. And while Yoshida's specific account was later discredited, the controversy surrounding it became an important part of the wider debate over the comfort women system. In 1991, the first major breakthrough occurred when Kim Ok-sun, a former comfort woman, publicly testified in a lawsuit against the Japanese government demanding an apology and compensation from Japan, and many others followed suit. A year later, Prime Minister Kichi Miyazawa formally announced an investigation into the matter, and it found evidence that Japanese military authorities were directly or indirectly involved in the establishment and management of comfort stations and the transfer of women. After a year of investigation, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono stated that comfort stations were established in response to requests from military authorities, and that the military was directly or indirectly involved. Women were mainly recruited through third-party recruiters, but were found to have been coaxed, tricked, or coerced into leaving to what they thought were job opportunities. Japan proceeded to offer, quote, sincere apologies and remorse. In 1995, Japan set up the Asian Women's Fund, intended to provide atonement money and support to the victims of Japanese sexual violence. The idea was based on atonement money amounting to 2 million yen, donated from the citizens of Japan, and 3 million yen provided by the government of Japan for medical expenses. Totaling 5 million yen, Japan presented the fund as a way of providing atonement and practical assistance after maintaining that the legal claims issue had already been settled. However, many Korean survivors and support groups rejected the atonement money because it came from private Japanese donations rather than being characterized as direct government compensation. The Japanese government increasingly regarded the matter as having been addressed, while many Korean survivors and activists continued to reject that conclusion. It wasn't until 2007 that the issue entered international discourse once again, through Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He brought up the comfort women issue by stating there is no evidence of coercion, in the sense of recruitment by force, and controversy was further complicated by the destruction of some Japanese military records during the final stages of the war. This essentially questioning whether Japanese authorities had physically coerced women into the system, which immediately caused enormous international backlash. Despite Abe's controversial remarks, his government subsequently reaffirmed that Japan continued to stand by the Kōno Statement, and Abe later expressed remorse for the suffering experienced by former comfort women. In 2015, a new settlement was attempted. With the 2015 Comfort Women Agreement, Japan pledged 1 billion yen to a Korean foundation supporting former victims and called for the issue to be finally and irreversibly resolved. In 2017, the South Korean President Moon Jae-in administration established a foreign ministry task force to review the 2015 agreement, reevaluating the 2015 agreement, arguing that many shortcomings were evident, including lack of participation and consideration for the wishes of the victims. While not full-out canceling the actual agreement, Moon subsequently said the agreement could not, in his view, resolve the issue. Despite all of this, why is the issue still so controversial? Japan continues to assert that it has made multiple apologies and efforts to compensate the victims, and in fact, it has. However, many South Korean survivors, civic organizations, and politicians have argued that these apologies and settlements have not adequately reflected Japan's historical responsibility. Key examples including some Japanese politicians showing revisionist tendencies, such as Nariaki Nakayama, an LDP politician and former education minister, who has argued that there is no evidence supporting the commonly alleged account of military forcible recruitment, and the 2015 LDP Special Mission Committee on the Honor and Trust of Japan, which sought to counter what it considered misleading international portrayals of the comfort women issue and recommended that Japan more actively communicate its position abroad. In 2021, the Japanese government reaffirmed that it had found no documents directly demonstrating that Japanese military or government authorities forcibly abducted comfort women, and it objected to certain terminology implying such direct abduction. Critics argued that this narrowed the historical interpretation of the system, while the Japanese government maintained that it was simply reflecting the findings of its investigation. These narratives reflects in school textbooks, and while important to note that while not all textbooks reflect a reduction or removal of comfort women, an analyzation of junior high school books from 2021 and 2025 shows that almost all approved history textbooks now omit the issue of comfort women entirely. In the two exceptions identified by the study, Yamakawa Shupan includes only a brief marginal note, while Manabisha reproduces an extract from the 1993 Kōno Statement and explains the government position. The Japanese government has also repeatedly called for the removal or relocation of comfort women memorials in South Korea and abroad. In 2017, after a comfort woman statue was installed outside Japan's Consulate General in Busan, Japan temporarily recalled its ambassador and consul general and strongly requested the statue's removal, citing the 2015 Japan-South Korea agreement and concerns regarding diplomatic premises. Japan has also objected to memorials overseas, including a statue installed in Berlin in 2020, whose removal Japan continued to request after a German court suspended an initial removal order. Similar objections were raised over memorials in the United States, including those in San Francisco and Glendale. The Japanese government argues that such memorials can present what it considers an inaccurate or one-sided interpretation of the comfort women issue, particularly regarding claims of systematic forcible recruitment, while critics argue that removing or suppressing these memorials risks minimizing the experiences of the victims. The result has contributed to concerns among critics about how Japan's wartime history is represented in education. Given the gridlock that both Korea and Japan have faced ever since the end of World War II, it is questionable on if there will ever actually be a reconciliation or closing of this painful chapter of history. It is factual that Japan has officially apologized numerous times for wartime atrocities, including the subject of comfort women. At the same time, the persistence of skepticism among many South Korean survivors and members of Korean civil society can be understood in light of the conflicting statements, disputes over legal responsibility, and disagreements over how the history should be represented. Regardless, the most important thing to remember is the victims, who bore unbearable pain and suffering during World War II as comfort women. These survivors endured extraordinary suffering and hardship. Whatever disagreements remain between governments, their experiences and dignity should remain at the center of the historical discussion. If you like this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you can see more videos just like this.